Welcome, Year 13 psychology students. I am so incredibly glad you've joined me today. We are going to be focusing on a highly specific, absolutely crucial point from your AQA specification. We're looking at theory of mind as a cognitive explanation for autism. Now, this is a foundational flipped learning session. What that means is we're going to build a really solid framework of understanding right here, right now. That way, when we're back in the classroom together, we can just dive straight into the high-level evaluation and exam practice. So get your notes ready, settle in, and let's get started.
Okay, just to quickly manage our cognitive load, here's our roadmap for the session. We'll start with an intro and knowledge bridge, move into our AO1 core theory explanation, tackle AO2 application and an exam question, look at AO3 evaluation and debates, do a quick stretch, challenge and quiz, and finish up with a practical study and summary.
Right, Section 1, Intro and Knowledge Bridge. Let's connect what we already know.
Think back to our previous lessons for a moment. We've spent a good amount of time looking at general cognitive development, right? How children learn to think, how they reason, and how they understand the physical world around them. Well, today, we're shifting our focus just a little bit. We're moving into the realm of social cognition. This is all about how we process information about other people. Specifically, we're looking at a huge developmental milestone, that moment when we understand that other people have mental states, thoughts, and beliefs that are completely separate from our own. And that, my friends, is where theory of mind comes in.
Moving on to Section 2, our AO1 core theory explanation. Have your pens ready. You're definitely going to want to jot down these key definitions and studies. Let's nail down a precise AO1 definition straight out of the gate. Theory of mind, or TOM as we'll often call it, is the ability to attribute mental states, things like beliefs, desires, and intentions to yourself and to others. Basically, it's the understanding that someone else's mental state might be completely different from reality and totally different from your own. Typically, children hit this massive milestone around the age of 4, and it's absolutely crucial. It's the key to how we predict human behavior, how we interpret communication, and how we understand emotions. So you might be wondering, how exactly does this connect to autism? Well, back in the 1980s, the psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen proposed a really groundbreaking cognitive explanation. He argued that the traditional diagnostic features of autism, which are known as Wing and Gould's triad of impairments, could actually be explained by a core deficit in theory of mind. Just think about it for a second. If you struggle to mentalize or read the minds of others, you're naturally going to have impairments in social interaction. You're going to face communication difficulties like maybe missing sarcasm, and you'll likely have impairments in imagination, which can affect things like pretend play. To test this idea, Baron-Cohen and his colleagues designed a test that is now incredibly famous. Watch how I break this down, because this is a core AO1 study you absolutely must know. It's called the Sally Ann False Belief Task. In this study, children are shown 2 dolls. Step 1, Sally puts her marble in her basket and leaves the room. Step 2, naughty Ann takes the marble and moves it into her own box. Step 3 is the crucial question for the child. When Sally returns, where will she look for her marble? To answer correctly, the child has to understand that Sally holds a false belief. Basically, she doesn't know what we know. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Almost all typically developing 4-year-olds pass this test with flying colors. Even children with Down syndrome, who generally have lower overall IQs, typically pass it just fine. But for the autistic children tested in 1985, a staggering 80% of them answered incorrectly. They pointed to the box, which was the actual physical location of the marble, rather than where Sally falsely believed it to be. This sharply illustrated that autistic children have a very specific difficulty in representing mental states. That beautifully illustrates a basic TOM deficit, but the theory actually goes deeper, because as we grow up, our social cognition becomes way more complex. Around age 7 or 8, typically developing children achieve what's called second-order false belief understanding. This is a layered belief. It's understanding what John thinks that Mary thinks. It's quite complex. And research shows that autistic individuals often struggle significantly with this higher-order TOM reasoning, sometimes developing it much later or sometimes not at all.
Now, to make sure they weren't just relying on childhood tasks, Baron-Cohen later developed a much more advanced assessment designed specifically for adults. It's called the Reading the Mind and the Eyes test. Participants are shown photos of just the eye region of a face, and they have to infer complex emotions from that alone. Adults with autism scored significantly lower on this test compared to neurotypical controls. This is vital AO1 evidence for your exams because it proves that TOM deficits aren't just a childhood delay. They persist right into adulthood and extend far beyond those simple false belief tasks.
All right, moving into Section 3, AO2, application and exam. Let's look at how we apply this to the real world and secure those top marks. Picture a classroom scenario for a moment. Imagine an autistic child dominating a conversation about their favorite topic, completely unaware that their peers are getting a bit bored. Or perhaps they're really struggling with games of hide and seek or pretend play. Using the theory of mind account, we can explain this AO2 scenario perfectly. You see, the child isn't being intentionally rude at all. They simply lack the mental representation to infer that the listener might want to change the subject, or they struggle to imagine the alternative perspectives required to understand deception and role play. So, let's look at how they might test this in an exam. Here's an AO2 question linked directly to research methods. A researcher uses a doll play task to assess false belief. Explain one research method limitation of using this task to measure theory of mind. What they're asking to do here is critically evaluate the experimental design itself. Watch closely how I structure this model answer. First, we identify the research methods issue, in this case, task validity, specifically looking at the cognitive demands of the task. Second, we link it back to the tome assessment. We'd explain that the Salian task relies heavily on language comprehension. It relies on memory to remember where the marble originally was, and it relies on the cognitive ability to inhibit the impulse to just point to the actual location. Finally, we bring it home with our conclusion. A child might fail this task simply because the memory demands are just too high, not because they genuinely lack a theory of mind. And that, of course, limits the internal validity of the measurement. On to Section 4, AO3 Evaluation and Debates. Let's really explore the critiques of this theory. Okay, let's weigh this up. On the strength side, we have incredibly robust empirical support from studies like the Saliana task. On top of that, the comparison with Down syndrome children proves specificity. It shows the deficit isn't just a general intellectual delay, it is highly specific to social communication. However, we've already noted the task validity limitations regarding memory demands. But an even more significant AO3 limitation you need to know is that Tom is ultimately an incomplete explanation. It brilliantly explains social communication issues, but it completely fails to account for the other core diagnostic features of autism, things like restricted interests, repetitive movements, and sensory sensitivities. I want to pause right here for a massive misconception alert. When you're writing quickly in an exam, it is so easy to accidentally write that autistic people fail theory of mind tasks. That is false. Many verbally able autistic individuals easily pass false belief tasks. What this tells us is that Tom deficits are characteristic of autism, but they are absolutely not universal. You must always use cautious language in your essays. Say many individuals, never say all. Let's weave in a mandatory synoptic link to really boost your marks. Theory of mind fits perfectly within the broader cognitive approach. Think about schemas for a second, those mental frameworks we all use to organize information. We can actually argue that autistic individuals may lack a robust social schema. They might just have difficulty constructing those cognitive templates that are needed for typical social reasoning. Linking TOM back to schema processing is a fantastic way to demonstrate high-level, integrated psychological thinking to the examiner. And for our issues and debates link, we really have to discuss reductionism. To claim that a single, isolated deficit, like theory of mind, explains the absolute entirety of autism is highly reductionist. Contemporary psychology demands a much more multi-component approach. Theory of mind really has to be integrated with other cognitive models, things like differences in executive functioning or central coherence, if we want to provide a truly holistic explanation of the autistic experience. Section 5, Stretch, Challenge, and Quiz. Time to really consolidate everything you've learned today. I want to leave you with a high-level conceptual prompt to really chew on outside of the session. How might cultural variations in mental state talk, meaning how much parents discuss feelings and thoughts with their children in different cultures, influence both the development and the assessment of theory of mind? Could it be that the Salian task is actually culturally biased? Have a deep think about that for our next lesson. Right, time for a quick, low-stakes retrieval quiz. Number 1, define theory of mind. Number 2, name the 1985 false belief task we discussed. And number 3, state one research method validity issue with that exact task. I'm going to pause for just a few seconds to let you think. Okay, let's check how you did. Number 1 is the ability to attribute mental states to oneself and others. Number 2 is the Sally Ann task. And 3 is that the task relies heavily on language or memory demands. Brilliant job if you got those right. Finally, Section 6, Practical Study and Summary. Let's wrap this all up. To truly ground this theory in reality, you can try a really simple ethical replication right in your classroom. Have a friend step outside, hide their pencil case, and when they come back in, just ask the person next to you where the friend is going to look for it. It's a real-world false belief task. So, to summarize today's explainer, for A1, theory of mind describes the cognitive ability to attribute mental states, which Baron Cohen argued is deficient in autism. For AO2, this explains real-world difficulties with social rules and pretend play. And for AO3, while the theory definitely has strong empirical support, it is an incomplete reductionist explanation that ignores sensory behaviors. So I'll leave you with this. If theory of mind only explains a fraction of the autistic experience, what hidden cognitive differences are still waiting to be discovered to give us the complete picture? Review your notes, and we will explore exactly that in our next lesson. Keep up the excellent work.